two kinds of mistakes people make at Christmas. The first is assuming a toy is just a toy. The second is assuming something is dead before you bring it inside. These records document what happens when both assumptions are wrong.
My sister's house always smells like cinnamon this time of year. She goes overboard on scented candles, leaving the whole place with a sickly, sweet smell. I stepped in with my weekend bag and kicked the door shut behind me, shaking off the cold. She was going away with the kids, 3 days in a caravan park with their dad, and she'd only given me one real instruction before leaving. "Don't move the elf," she'd said, serious enough that I actually laughed at her. "It's part of their countdown thing. They track where he shows up each morning, so just leave him where he is. Please." At the time, it sounded harmless. I hung my coat, dropped my bag in the hallway, and wandered into the living room. Most of the decorations were already up. A half-dressed tree, a few paper snowflakes taped to the windows, strings of warm white lights drooped over the mantel. And there he was, the elf. Small, plastic, bright red felt clothes, fixed grin. Propped on the mantel. I don't know why, but even then, something about it made me pause. Maybe it was the way its eyes and smile were painted. Maybe it was the fact it faced the room directly, like it was keeping watch. I shook the feeling off. I was tired, cold, and hungry. Creepy elf dolls were low on the list of things I cared about. I made myself a cup of tea, flicked on the TV, and settled under a blanket. The house creaked a couple of times, but houses do that in winter. By the time I went up to bed, the elf was still sitting exactly where it should be, looking over the living room with that same fake grin. I left the hallway light on as I climbed the stairs, just because the house felt a little too quiet. As I lay in bed and listened to the heating ticking in, the image of the elf kept creeping back into my mind. Not doing anything, not moving, just watching. I eventually drifted off, thinking nothing of it. I woke up the next morning to a faint, cold draft on the side of my face. The kind of cold that doesn't belong indoors. Thin, pointed, like someone had opened a window for a few seconds while I slept. For a moment I lay still, trying to remember where I was. The cinnamon smell helped. Then I sat up. I frowned. Something felt off. I swung my legs out of bed and stretched. The elf was sitting neatly on my bedside table, facing me. I froze mid-movement, one socked foot hanging in the air. It was the exact same elf, red outfit, bright grin, painted on rosy cheeks. But it wasn't supposed to be upstairs. It wasn't supposed to be anywhere near me. "Okay," I said quietly to myself. No. I scanned the room automatically, as if expecting someone to be hiding behind the door, or under the bed, or crouched in the corner. Nothing. Just the elf, perched like it had been there all night, its glossy eyes aimed directly at where my face had been on the pillow. And the worst part wasn't that it had moved. The worst part was the angle. It wasn't positioned straight ahead like a normal toy. Its body twisted slightly toward me, like someone had posed it with care. I rubbed my hands over my face, heart speeding up. I told myself I must have moved it without thinking last night, that maybe I'd picked it up while tidying, or put it down somewhere weird, or something. Anything. I grabbed my phone and sent a text to my sister. "Did you move the elf before you left? It was upstairs when I woke up, LOL." A few seconds later, "No? It was on the mantel." I stared at the message for a long moment. "Just the kids playing a prank before they left," I typed back. A lie, mostly for me. I gingerly picked the elf up by the arm, holding it like it was something sticky, and carried it downstairs. Its plastic body was cold, colder than the room. Back in the living room, I placed it exactly where I remembered it being the night before, right in the center of the mantelpiece. Then I stepped back. It looked normal again. Innocent. Ridiculous, even. I stood there a few seconds too long, waiting for it to move again. It didn't. I shook myself out of it, made breakfast, and tried to pretend the day was ordinary. But every time I passed the living room doorway, I caught myself glancing at the mantel, checking, just checking, to make sure the elf was still exactly where I put it. By midday, I'd checked 6 times. By evening, I'd start to wish I'd trusted my instincts. By early afternoon, I'd relaxed a bit, enough to feel slightly stupid about how shaken I'd been. It was just a toy. A weird one, sure, but it wasn't going to get up and walk around by itself. I kept telling myself that as I threw on my coat and stepped outside to do a quick food shop before it got dark. The air was sharp and cold in that December way that feels clean, like the world's holding its breath before snow. My car was on the driveway, thin frost still clinging to the windows. I fished for my keys, already making a mental list of what I needed from the shop. Then I noticed something. A shape in the passenger seat. Just a little silhouette, barely visible through the frosted glass. At first, I thought it was a scarf I'd left behind, or a bag, nothing unusual. But something in my stomach flipped. I scraped the frost away with the edge of my sleeve, and froze. It was the elf, sitting upright, in the passenger seat, buckled in with the seatbelt. Its head was tilted slightly toward the driver's side, as if waiting for me to join it. For a long moment I couldn't move. The air felt heavy, pressing down on my chest, grounding me to the driveway. My first instinct was to check the doors. I grabbed the handle. Locked. I checked all 4 just to be sure, every single one locked tight. There was no sign of forced entry, no footprints except my own. My breathing went shallow. I told myself there had to be a normal explanation. There had to be. But the elf was positioned, placed with intention. Its hands resting neatly in its lap, little felt legs straightened out across the seat. And the seatbelt. The seatbelt was pulled fully across its torso, clicked in. I unlocked the car with shaking hands, climbed into the driver's seat, and hesitated before touching it. It looked different in the daylight. Cheerful, plastic, harmless. I picked it up by the elbow, the same way you'd touch something that might bite, and set it on the driveway as far from me as I could without throwing it. The car felt tainted. Like whatever had been in there with it had left something behind. I shut the door and hit the lock button twice, just to hear the confirmation beep. Then I scooped the elf back up and took it inside. This time, I didn't put it on the mantel. I didn't want it anywhere I could see it. So I opened the highest kitchen cupboard I could reach, the one with the cereal boxes, baking trays, and things nobody uses, and shoved the elf behind everything, wedging it between an old tin of self-raising flour and a forgotten pasta jar. I shut the cupboard door hard. "Stay," I muttered under my breath, like it was a dog. The absurdity didn't make me laugh. I spent the rest of the afternoon triple-checking the locks on the windows, the doors, even the back gate. Every hour or so, I'd glance at that cupboard door, expecting something. But it stayed closed. For now. By late afternoon, the sky had already dipped into that bruised winter blue. It felt like whole street is holding its breath until the first house turned its Christmas lights on. I stepped outside to take the bins out, mostly for the fresh air, and partly, if I'm honest, to get away from the cupboard where the elf was hidden. Being in the same house as it made my skin crawl. As I dragged the bin toward the pavement, I heard voices from the garden next door. The neighbors' kids, 2 of them, were kicking a football around. "Hi," I said, trying to sound normal. They waved back. I don't even know what made me do it, but something in me wanted confirmation, wanted someone to tell me I was being stupid. So I said, "Hey, you know those elf on the shelf things?" The older one, maybe 9 or 10, nodded immediately. "Yeah, your sister's got one. We see it in their window sometimes." "Right," I said. "Well, have you ever seen this one?" I didn't even realize I was holding the elf until I lifted it up. Both kids froze. Not in fear exactly, more like confusion. They exchanged a look, frowning. "That's not their elf," the older girl said slowly. My stomach dropped. The younger boy shook his head. "No, theirs has a different face. That one's wrong." "Wrong how?" I asked before I could stop myself. They looked at each other again. This time the girl lowered her voice. "Mum says if you ever find an elf in your house that isn't yours, you're not supposed to touch it." Silence. "Why?" I asked, even though I already felt myself shrinking from the answer. "She said they copy things. They pretend to be toys, and once you touch them, they like you." She paused. "That's what Mum said anyway. Probably just a story." But her expression didn't match the word, story. A cold shiver crawled down my spine, slow and deliberate. I forced a laugh, thin, brittle. "Yeah, sounds like it." But my hand tightened around the elf instinctively. The younger one nodded at the toy with a sudden seriousness children shouldn't have. "You should get rid of it." I looked at the elf, its stupid grin, its glossy eyes, its little felt arms frozen in an almost welcoming gesture. Something inside me agreed. "Yeah," I murmured. "Yeah, I think I will." The kids went back to their game as if nothing had happened. I marched straight to the front doorstep. I set it down gently, like it might react if I was rough. Then I stepped back inside and locked the door. Twice. A part of me expected to feel relief. I didn't, because the house still felt wrong, like something was waiting. And when I went to bed that night, I left the landing light on. Gray December light seeped through the blinds when I opened my eyes the next morning, and the cold, heavy silence told me it hadn't stayed outside. I barely slept. Every creak of the house, every shift in the radiators, every car driving past in the early hours made my nerves jolt. I kept waiting to hear something outside the bedroom door, or the soft thud of something falling, or, God forbid, the sound of tiny plastic feet on the floorboards. But the house stayed still. Not peaceful, just still. Like it was holding something in. When the gray morning light finally crept in, I dragged myself out of bed, throat dry, and padded downstairs. Halfway down, I stopped. I didn't see the elf yet. I just felt something wrong, like walking into a room where the furniture's been moved ever so slightly. My heartbeat sped up. I took the last few steps slowly. And there it was, back on the mantelpiece, exactly where it had been the very first night. Not outside on the doorstep where I'd left it, not beside the door, not anywhere that made sense. Inside, perched neatly in the same spot, as if it had never left. I stepped closer, barely breathing. Its smile. That stupid, painted grin, it wasn't the same shape. Not dramatically, just enough that I could see the corners were higher, stretched. The plastic looking subtly warped, like someone had pressed their thumbs into its cheeks and pulled too hard. "Jesus," I whispered, stumbling back. My hands shook as I grabbed my phone. Not to text anyone, not to call, to record. I hit the camera button and pointed it at the elf, zooming in, hands unsteady. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, in the tiny screen, the elf's head twitched. A tiny, sharp movement. Like a single frame had been cut and replaced. I dropped the phone. It clattered against the floorboards, screen still glowing up at the ceiling. "Nope," I said out loud, voice cracking. This wasn't the kind of thing you rationalized. There wasn't a box in the human brain labeled, "Elf moves itself, probably fine." I backed away from the mantel, keeping my eyes on the elf like it might leap down at any second. Every instinct screamed at me to get out of the house, to not be alone with it anymore. I didn't even care about my sister's rule. I didn't care about the kids' Christmas countdown. I cared about the fact that whatever was in this house with me wasn't a toy. I grabbed my phone from the floor, my bag from the hallway, and bolted upstairs. I'd pack fast. Clothes, charger, keys, just enough to get out. I didn't know where I'd go. I just knew it had to be away from here. I zipped the bag halfway, breath shaky. That's when the whispering started. Behind me. The whispering was so soft at first, I thought it was the wind slipping in through a cracked window. A thin, papery sound. I froze halfway through pulling the zip on my bag. The whispering didn't stop. It got clearer, closer, right behind me. I turned slowly, heartbeat punching against my ribs, expecting... I don't even know what I expected. Something big, something human. But it was worse. The elf. The wrong elf. Standing on my bedside table, not sitting, standing upright, its stiff plastic legs supporting it in a way I had never seen before. Its head was tilted so far to the side, it looked like its neck should have snapped. Its painted smile stretched impossibly wide from cheek to cheek. And it was whispering. Not a language I recognized, not even something with rhythm or pattern. Just a stream of soft, urgent syllables that made my skin crawl. "Stop," I croaked, voice barely there. The elf didn't stop. It leaned forward, its tiny felt arms dangling like dead weights, and the whispering shifted, lower, more deliberate. I backed away until the backs of my knees hit the bed. That's when a small thunk sounded above me. I looked up. Another elf. Perched on top of the wardrobe. My sister's elf. The real one. The right colors. The right face. Its painted eyes were fixed entirely on the one whispering to me. And this one wasn't still. Its head moved, slowly, deliberately, as it tracked the other elf's motions. Not twitchy like the first. Smooth, controlled, almost protective. "What?" I whispered. The real elf's head turned toward me. It didn't smile, it didn't tilt. It just stared, wooden, unblinking. I stumbled back, hitting the wardrobe with my shoulder. My breath came fast, shallow, dizzy. The wrong elf stopped whispering. Slowly, so slowly, it turned its head toward the wardrobe elf, its warped grin bending even wider. I didn't wait to find out what came next. My body took over. Fight or flight with no fight left in it. I grabbed my half-zipped bag, snatched my phone, and bolted for the door. The hallway lights were still on, thank God, painting the house in harsh yellow as I tore downstairs 2 steps at a time. Behind me, in the bedroom above, I heard something move. Something small, something fast. I didn't look back. I slammed the front door behind me and stood on the frozen driveway, chest heaving, my breath trembling in the air. I threw my bag into the back seat of the car, so hard it bounced against the headrest. I just needed to get away. Anywhere but here. The engine coughed twice before it turned over, the cold biting at the battery. My fingers were shaking so badly I kept missing the gear stick. All I could think was, drive. Drive now. The house disappeared behind me, swallowed by the dark edges of the street and the rows of unlit windows. For the first time in hours, I let out a breath that didn't shake. It wasn't safe, but it was away. Distance felt like protection, even if it was only a few meters. The radio flicked on automatically, some cheerful Christmas song, and I turned it off so fast the button clicked painfully under my thumb. Silence was better. Silence meant I could hear if... No, don't think about it. I reached the junction at the end of the road and paused, foot on the brake. The street was empty. Okay, I told myself. You're in the car, you're safe. But something felt wrong. A weight, a presence, like I wasn't alone in the car. I swallowed, forcing myself to glance in the rearview mirror. My bag was slumped on the back seat, half unzipped from my panic earlier. I stared at it. Nothing moved. I pulled over and put on the handbrake. I leaned closer to the bed, narrowing my eyes to make out the shape properly. Just my clothes, just the bag. Then, something shifted. A faint rustle of fabric, a tiny scrape of plastic against nylon. Heart pounding, I reached back with one hand and pulled the bag further open. A small red hat poked out first. Then the smooth, glossy forehead, 2 painted eyes, the elf's face, tilted up at me, as if it had been waiting for me to notice. My throat closed. The elf's head tipped slowly, deliberately, to one side, like it was curious, like it was studying me. I recoiled so hard I knocked my elbow against the door. "Oh God," I gasped. "Oh God, no!" The elf didn't blink, didn't twitch, just stared. Its grin looked wider in the confined light of the car, stretching too far across its face. I jammed the car into first gear, tires screeching as I lurched forward. I didn't look back again, not in the mirror, not at the road. I just drove. The bag rustled behind me, quietly, once, as if the elf was settling in for the journey.
The tree farm looked smaller than I remembered. A handwritten sign at the entrance said, "Cut your own, cash only," nailed to a post that leaned a little to the left. No crowds, no music, no fuss. Just a handful of rows and the quiet hum of a generator somewhere behind the shed. The owner came out as I parked. Older guy, heavy boots, green jacket that had seen better winters. "You after a tree?" he asked. "Yeah, just one," I said. He nodded toward the nearest field. "That's all mine up to the fence. Pick whatever you like in that lot." I glanced past him. There was a line of fence posts that looked like they'd once been connected, but the wire between them sagged in long, broken loops. Hard to tell where the boundary actually was. "What's beyond the posts?" I asked, more out of small talk than anything. He scratched the back of his neck. "Dunno who owns it. Not me. Someone trims it now and then." He shrugged. "Never met them. They keep to themselves." "Do you rent it out?" I asked. "Nope." "So, who plants the trees over there?" Another shrug, this one tighter. "They're just always there. Look, stick to this bit, all right? Simpler." It didn't sound like a warning, More like he didn't want a headache from some unseen neighbor. Got it, I said. He handed me a small saw.
Bring it back when you're done.
I headed out between the rows. Most of the trees were fine, nothing magical or strange about them. Some lopsided, some thin, some a bit bald on one side like they grew up against the wind. Normal. I walked a little further, trying to get a better look at the taller ones near the back. That was when I realized the line of trees didn't stop where the fence posts did. The next row didn't look any different from the owner's section. No signs, no clear divide, just slightly denser growth and ground that dipped a little under my boots. It was almost impossible to tell where his ended and whoever's began. Whatever boundary had been there was long gone. I spotted a decent tree a few rows over, full enough, straight enough, nothing special, but it would look fine once decorated. I didn't think twice about crossing the loose idea of a border. If anything, I assumed the owner had just been being territorial. I crouched, checked the trunk, and started sawing. The wood gave way steadily, shedding a few flakes of bark onto my sleeve. It wasn't weirdly light or heavy. It didn't feel strange in my hands. It was just a tree. When it finally tipped, I caught it awkwardly, laughed at myself, and hoisted it up over my shoulder. A few needles brushed my arm with a faint sting, but that was normal. I dragged it back toward the car, stepping through the broken line of fence posts without even thinking about it. As I reached the owner again, he squinted at the tree.
Thought you'd stick to my field,
he said. I did? I said. He glanced behind me toward the sagging fence line.
I said up to the posts.
There were barely any there, I said.
Fence used to be complete,
he muttered.
Never got round to fixing it.
He didn't sound angry, just a little annoyed.
If someone comes asking, that ain't my pine,
he said, wiping his hands again.
But I won't tell if you don't.
I smiled awkwardly. Deal. He nodded once, slow, but as I loaded the tree into my car, I caught him watching me more closely than before. Not fearful, not dramatic, just thoughtful, like he was trying to remember the last time he'd seen someone cut a tree from that side. I brushed it off. A tree was a tree. Getting the tree through the front door was more of a battle than choosing it. Pine needles everywhere, a shower of them onto the floorboards like confetti, the trunk scraping gently along the hallway wall. I propped it upright in the living room, leaning it against the wall while I dug out the tree stand from the cupboard under the stairs. It was bent from last year and wobbled when I screwed it into place, but eventually the trunk held steady. I stepped back, hands on my hips. It looked fine. A bit wider than I meant to pick, but not bad. It had a kind of misshapen charm once I'd rotated it to hide a bald patch at the back. As I circled around it, brushing off stray needles, something on the bark caught my eye. A thin, curved line. Not straight like a scratch, more looping. At first, I thought I'd damaged the trunk carrying it in, but then I noticed another line beside it, and another. Little arcs and circles, faintly darker than the rest of the bark. If you glanced quickly, you'd think they were growth rings exposed by where the saw bit in, but they weren't only at the base. They spiraled upward, interrupted by knots, reappearing higher up the trunk in short, sharp segments. Did I do that? I muttered under my breath. Maybe the saw snagged oddly, or maybe I'd scraped the bark against the car boot or the fence. Trees get marked up during transport all the time. I ran my fingers over the patterns. They weren't perfectly carved. They didn't have that clean, intentional look. More like part of the tree's natural texture, just arranged in a way I didn't expect. A couple of them had sharper edges, though, tiny notches that didn't quite match the randomness of the others. A weird, prickling curiosity tiptoed up my spine. I circled halfway around the trunk again. There were more symbols on the other side. Not the same shapes either. Some oval, some almost triangular, joined by faint vertical grooves like the tree had grown around something that pressed into it. They were subtle. You could pass them a dozen times and assume they were scars from weather or insects. Still, I knew I hadn't seen them at the farm, and I'd looked at the trunk closely while sawing it. Well, I muttered, nothing a few baubles won't cover. I stepped back again, shaking off the chill of uncertainty. I'd overthought it. People always said Christmas trees looked different once they warmed up indoors. Branches settling, bark drying, patterns showing you didn't notice before. Still, just to convince myself, I snapped a quick photo of the trunk. Not for evidence, not then. More so I could compare it later, once I'd straightened the branches. The room felt colder suddenly, a draft brushing along my arm. I checked the window, closed. Probably just the tree releasing cold air. That was normal, wasn't it? I told myself yes. I vacuumed up the needles and returned to the kitchen for a drink, telling myself the symbols were nothing. Nature's weird. Trees grow weird. By evening, the house smelled like pine. Not the fake candle kind. Real pine, sharp and resinous. The scent that clings to your clothes. I'd opened the branches out, let them settle a bit, plugged in the lights I'd found in a tangled knot in the attic. They flickered at first, then steadied. The living room felt warmer, more lived in, festive even. I put on a film and half-watched it from the sofa, the tree standing in the corner in my peripheral vision. Every now and then I'd glance over, checking how it looked with the lights on. Fine, completely normal. At around 9:30, I paused the film to make a cup of tea. That's when I heard it. A faint, irregular scratching. I stopped halfway across the room, listening. It had that same rhythm small animals make, the scrabble of claws on wood or cardboard. Except it wasn't coming from the walls, or the floor, or the attic. It was coming from the tree, very softly, almost swallowed by the hum of the fridge in the kitchen. I waited, holding my breath, trying to pinpoint the sound. Nothing. Then, a single, sharp tick, like something inside the trunk shifted. I frowned and crouched down beside the stand. "Please don't be a mouse," I whispered to the tree like an idiot. I tugged on a lower branch and shook it gently. Some needles fell, but nothing scurried out. No movement. It was probably nothing, a dry branch settling. Sap contracting now the tree was warm. Wood does that. I stood up, but the nagging doubt wouldn't drop. Just to be sure, I grabbed my phone and opened the camera app. I filmed the tree for a few seconds, trying to catch anything unusual. Stillness. I went back to the sofa. The film resumed. Another faint scratch, then another, slightly deeper, like something inside the trunk pulled against the grain. The hairs on my arms rose. I muted the TV. The room fell silent. The tree stood motionless in the glow of the fairy lights, branches relaxed, lights twinkling gently. But the sound, I couldn't deny it now. Soft, persistent, like something shifting behind the bark. I told myself it had to be an insect nest, or a trapped spider, something boring and unpleasant but explainable. Still, I noticed something I hadn't before. Every so often, no pattern, no clear trigger, the branches seemed to adjust. Not by much, just a tiny shift, like a slow exhale. It wasn't obvious unless you stared. I stared. The tree swelled by a fraction, like the trunk flexed internally, then relaxed. I blinked hard. That couldn't be right. Trees didn't do that, not inside. The living room felt suddenly colder, the air heavier. I wrapped a blanket around my shoulders and made myself go back to the film. I refused to stare at the tree all night. But I didn't turn the sound back on. And I didn't sleep easy. Not with the soft, irregular scratching drifting through the quiet every few minutes. By morning, I'd convinced myself the scratching had a normal explanation. Pine trees dry out. They settle. They creak. Maybe sap pockets were contracting. Maybe a beetle had hitched a ride. But still, I didn't want to be alone with that tree again that night. Around lunchtime, I grabbed my keys and drove back to the farm. Not to return the tree, just to ask a few questions, clarify where I was meant to cut from, prove to myself I hadn't done anything strange. The owner was outside stacking logs when I pulled up. He straightened, wiping his hands on his jacket, eyebrows lifting when he recognized me.
Back already?
He asked. Yeah, I said, trying to keep it casual. I think I might have cut from the wrong side yesterday. Thought I'd check. He let out a short breath that wasn't quite a sigh.
Probably did,
He said.
but like I told you, it's not my land past the fence posts. Never has been.
Do you know whose it is? I asked. He shook his head.
No idea. Someone keeps it trimmed occasionally. Never caught them at it. Sometimes I'll come out in the morning and branches will be cut neatly, like hedge work.
He paused.
But I never see anyone do it.
A cold little knot tightened behind my ribs. And the trees, I said. Do you know what species those ones are?
Same as mine,
He said.
but different.
He frowned, struggling for words.
They grow in funny ways. Straight one year, twisted the next. But I don't mess with them. Never have.
I pulled out my phone. I took a picture of the trunk when I got home. Does this look normal to you? I opened the photo, a close-up of the symbols, lines looping over each other, short notches like half-finished characters, grooves that didn't match any bark pattern I'd ever seen. His expression shifted the moment he saw it. Not fear, not shock, just a tightening around the mouth, a quiet recognition he didn't want to have. These marks, I said, are they from insects or…
They don't come from anything I know.
He interrupted softly. That's helpful, I said dryly. So not fungus, not animal damage? He shook his head.
No. I've seen marks like that once or twice on the trees past the fence.
He glanced toward the broken line of posts.
But only when they're new.
New? I echoed.
New trees,
He said.
on that side. Never saplings, never seeds, just new, full grown.
He lowered his voice.
Always the same number of them, though.
I stared at him, unsure I wanted to know what he meant. He didn't elaborate, so I pressed on. Look, I said, if that field isn't yours, should I return the tree? Or find whoever…
No,
He said, faster than I expected, then softer.
no. I wouldn't go back there.
The wind rustled the rose behind him, but he didn't turn to look. He kept his eyes on me, steady, tired.
Just decorate it, use it, treat it like any other tree, and when Christmas is done, take it far away. Don't mulch it, don't burn it.
Another pause.
Don't keep the trunk.
My throat went dry. Why? I asked. He shifted uncomfortably, as if the answer didn't want to come out.
Because whatever grows past that fence,
He gestured vaguely toward the collapsed boundary.
it's not forestry. Someone looks after those trees, but it's not a someone I've ever met.
He looked at the photo again.
And those marks, they mean it's not one of mine, and it's not one of any landowner I know.
The knot in my chest twisted tighter. You're saying I shouldn't have cut it, I said. He shook his head slowly.
I'm saying you should have left it alone.
I didn't know how to respond. I didn't want to know what he wasn't saying. I thanked him, though I'm not sure why, and walked back to my car. I didn't realize until I shut the door that my hands were shaking. And when I started the engine, a thought hit me so hard I felt it in my stomach. I'd left the living room window closed. But when I'd left the house that morning, the tree had looked like it had shifted a little closer to the center of the room. I sat in my car for a long time before going inside. I'm not sure why. Maybe I just didn't want to see the tree again. Maybe I hoped the owner's warning would fade in my head if I stayed out long enough. But eventually, the cold got to me, and I forced myself to unlock the front door. The house felt colder than I'd left it. Not freezing, just a few degrees off from normal, like someone had left a window cracked open. I checked. They were all shut. The tree stood in the corner of the living room, just where I'd put it, lights off, branches still. But the moment I stepped inside, a faint smell hit me. Not pine, something deeper, raw, like fresh-cut wood mixed with earth after rain. A smell forests have at their roots, not in living rooms. I swallowed and switched on the lamp. That's when I noticed the needles. A lot of them. They were scattered across the carpet like someone had shaken the tree violently. A ridiculous amount for a single afternoon. I stepped closer. More needles slipped down as I approached, falling silently in little drifts. Some seemed to drop before I touched anything, like they were shedding themselves. Great, I muttered. Brilliant. I've bought the world's sickest tree. I reached out to tug a branch, and stopped. The branch wasn't stiff like pine usually gets indoors. It felt loose. The needles slid under my fingertips like hair on a wig, shifting slightly against the grain. I gripped the branch properly. The entire thing rotated. Not snapping, not breaking, just turning smoothly. Too smoothly, like it was attached by a hinge instead of wood fibers. I backed away fast. The living room felt suddenly claustrophobic. The symbols I'd dismissed earlier looked darker now, more pronounced, like they had swollen outward. Some of them had widened, the grooves deeper than they were that morning. A faint sound came from inside the trunk, not the scratching from last night, something deeper. A slow, tight strain, like a heavy rope pulled taut. The trunk shifted, only slightly, but I saw it. The bark along one side bulged outward by a few millimeters, then settled, then bulged again, almost rhythmic. I grabbed my phone, hands sweating, and hit record. Another movement, higher up this time. A ridge formed, bark stretching like something pressed from behind it. My mouth went dry. Trees don't move like that. Not in slow, swelling pulses. Not from the inside out. Another groan, low and wooden. The trunk parted slightly along one of the natural vertical grooves. Not splitting, folding. The bark peeled back just a fraction, flexing like thick leather. For a second, I saw something beneath it. Not wood. A surface smoother, darker, almost glossy. Like skin, but not quite skin. A polished surface that caught the light of the lamp. I stumbled back and hit the sofa, knocking a cushion to the floor. The tree straightened. Not much, just a subtle readjustment, like a person correcting their posture. The top branches shook, then lowered a few degrees, settling into a different alignment. Every single movement small, controlled, measured. Not random, not animalistic, purposeful. I couldn't breathe. The trunk flexed again, a slow, spreading motion, as if two halves were gently separating. The gap widened a fraction more. A sliver of that dark surface inside caught the glow of the fairy lights. I didn't wait to see any more. I grabbed my bag, still by the door from last night, and bolted out of the house, nearly slipping on the frost as I reached the driveway. Behind me, through the thin living room curtains, the silhouette of the tree shifted one last time. Vertical, not tree-shaped. Tall, as if standing up. I fumbled with my keys, got into the car, slammed the lock, and started the engine with shaking hands. I reversed out of the driveway so fast the tires skidded.
As the car turned onto the main road, I made the mistake of looking back. Through the window, lit faintly by the lamp, the tree's shape was no longer a tree. It was unfolding. The road ahead blurred in streaks of frost and headlights. I didn't realize how hard I was gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles ached. My breathing wouldn't slow. My brain wouldn't slow. All I could picture was the way the tree had moved, not snapping, not breaking, not tearing, but unfolding, like it was shrugging off a shape that never really fit. I kept checking the rearview mirror, even though I knew nothing could fit through the doorway without breaking the frame. I kept checking the pavement, the houses, the dark edges of hedgerows. Everything looked normal. Utterly normal. I took the first turn too fast, and the car fishtailed slightly on the frost. I forced myself to ease up. Breathe. Just breathe. After a few minutes, the panic dulled into a cold throb behind my ribs. I pulled onto a lay-by on the outskirts of town, one of those gravel patches meant for dog walkers, turned off the engine, sat in silence, letting the heater hum. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I pulled up my sleeve where the tree had scraped me the day before. The thin mark on my forearm looked the same as it had that morning, a shallow, pale scratch. But when the car's interior light caught it, something about the shape made me pause. A curved line, then another. Not random. It looked familiar. I swallowed and compared it to the photo still open on my phone, the one from the trunk. The looping shape near the base, the one that had deepened overnight. My scratch matched it almost exactly. A small, sick wave rolled through me. No, that didn't make sense. I must be imagining it, stretching the similarity, seeing patterns where there were none. I flicked off the light and rubbed my temples. The night was quiet outside the car. Dead quiet. I turned the key to start the engine again and froze. Something stood in the road behind me. Tall, motionless, not tree-shaped anymore, not even pretending. A long, narrow silhouette with bends where no human joints would bend, limbs unfolding slightly to balance in the windless air. Not running, not approaching, just standing. Watching the car, watching me. My breath fogged the windscreen as I stared, barely blinking. The silhouette didn't move, didn't sway, didn't react to the headlights. It simply was. A figure that had learned how to stand by copying the shape of pine branches and bark. A figure that had worn the idea of a tree until I tore it away. I reached to turn off the headlights, and that's when I saw it. A faint glow, low and ember-like, pulsing once beneath its chest. A looped shape. A symbol. The same one scratched into my arm. I jerked my sleeve down instinctively. The glow faded. The figure didn't. It tilted its head, slowly, curiously, the way a deer might when hearing a distant sound. Then, as if satisfied, it stepped backward into the dark, its shape dissolving into the black line of the hedgerow. I didn't move until it was gone, didn't breathe until I couldn't see even a hint of it. Then I put the car into gear, stared at the frost-blurred road ahead, and drove. I didn't look back again. Not that night. Not ever.
In both cases, the objects were removed. Neither was destroyed. This is typical. Seasonal assumptions are rarely fatal. They are, however, persistent. Archive closed.